I'm going to be lighting you up every single day. I don't have a campaign loss hamstringing me now. It's war.
Everybody is looking at Spencer Pratt like the story ended because he did not become mayor. I think that is the wrong way to look at it, because sometimes the person who loses the race still exposes the room. And that is what I think happened here. You see, Spencer Pratt walked into Los Angeles politics as an outsider. He was loud. Oh, he was messy, unfiltered, completely outside the political polished game that they usually play. And whether people liked him or whether people hated him, he did something most politicians in the city do not do. He made people look. He made people ask questions. He made people wonder why the city keeps getting more expensive, more broken, more chaotic. And somehow the same political class keeps asking for more money, more power, more patience. And now look at what is happening around us. California is considering a bill that could make certain public record requests more expensive. The federal government is putting states on notice over unemployment fraud, waste, and abuse. Federal agents are on Skid Row after allegations involving homeless residents and election-related activity. Now, these may look like separate stories. They're not separate to me because they all point to the same bigger message. The people have been locked out of information. The money keeps disappearing into systems nobody fully explains. The most vulnerable people are used as political material. And when outsiders like Spencer Pratt start asking questions, the system starts protecting itself. So this video is not just about Spencer Pratt. It is about what Spencer Pratt's campaign may have accidentally exposed. Because once the public starts looking behind the curtain never looks the same again. In the first place, you see a system protecting itself. It's with information. Because before you can follow the money, before you can expose the corruption, before you can prove what they did, you need access to records. And that brings us to Assembly Bill 1821.
Public access to government records is an essential part of our democracy. That principle does not change with this bill.
So let me get this straight. California takes your money. California spends your money, makes decisions with your money. And then when you ask to see the paperwork, they may want to charge you by the hour. That is where we are now. Assembly Bill 1821 deals with California's Public Records Act, one of the few tools regular citizens have to see what the government is actually doing. Government, who got the contract? Public records. Hey, government, where did the money go? Public records. Excuse me, government. What did officials say when the cameras were off? Public records. So when Sacramento starts talking about hourly fees for certain requests, this is not boring paperwork, no. This is a warning. Because now the question becomes, can you afford to know the truth? That's the trick. They do not have to ban transparency. They just have to make it expensive enough that regular people walk away.
AB 1821 takes a narrow step to address that issue by aligning response timelines with business days, allowing for more realistic and reliable expectations for the public. It is my intent to continue working with stakeholders, and any additional changes to the language will remain consistent with the intent of improving how the Public Records Act process functions.
And of course, they dress it up. Of course, this is just for a commercial request. This is just for abusive requests, malicious intent. And it sounds reasonable, right? Until you realize the government always starts with the worst example, then expands the rule later. After all the homelessness money, after fire failures, after all the lawsuits, after election questions, California should be making information easier to access, not harder. See, this is the thing. You don't fix distrust by charging people to verify the truth. No, that's the way you prove the distrust was actually earned. And that is why this public records issue matters so much. Because if they can make information harder to get, they can make accountability harder to demand. And once the public cannot see the paperwork, the system gets to control the story. They tell you what happened. They tell you why it happened. They tell you nobody is really responsible, and then they move on. But the paperwork is where the truth lives. Contracts, the emails, the invoices, the internal warnings, the reports that never make it to the press conference. That is where you find out whether the government made an honest mistake or whether the failure was built into the system. And that brings us to the next piece, money. Because once information gets buried, money gets lost. And in California, We're not talking about pocket change. We're talking about massive taxpayer dollars moving through the government systems while regular people are expected to just keep paying and stop asking where it went.
Vice President's task force is eliminating all of this fraud. And just this morning, I sent a letter to 53 governors of states and territories saying the Department of Labor is going to take unprecedented action to stop this fraud. I have warned, along with my Inspector General at the Department of Labor, Anthony D'Esposito, that we will use every resource we have to stop states from making fraudulent unemployment insurance payments.
Now let's focus a bit more on money, because government loves making theft sound boring. Administrative failure, improper payments, system vulnerability, eligibility error. That's how they make billions of dollars sound like a paperwork issue. But normal people understand it very clearly. A mountain of taxpayer money went out the door, and the people guarding it failed. Now the federal government is putting states and territories on notice over unemployment fraud, waste, and abuse. And California is standing right in the spotlight. Think about how the system treats you. You miss a payment? They know. You owe taxes? They know. You make one mistake on a form. Suddenly government becomes very, very efficient. But when billions disappear, now everybody needs context. Now it's complicated. Now nobody can be blamed. Now, that money came from workers. That money came from families. That money came from small businesses, people paying rent, gas, taxes, fees, and still being told the state needs more. Before they ask for another dollar, somebody needs to explain what happened to the last mountain of money. Tell me exactly who ignored the warnings. Tell me the name of the person or the people who kept the system weak. Who got promoted anyway? You see, the citizen gets punished immediately. The system gets reviewed eventually. That is why audits matter. That is why public records are imperative, because without pressure, government does not confess. It simply rebrands failure and sends you another bill. And this is the pattern. When regular people mess up, the system knows exactly how to find them. But when the system messes up, suddenly everything becomes extremely complex. Suddenly nobody can explain it clearly. Suddenly it's not fraud. It's, let's just call it mismanagement. It's not failure. It's system vulnerability. It's not your money disappearing. It's an administrative issue. That language is not accidental. That language is how to keep people from getting angry. Because quite honestly, if you said it plainly, if you said billions went out the door and nobody at the top paid a real price, people will start demanding names. And that is what this city hates. Names, receipts, records, responsibility. But the money is only one side of the story, because while the money disappears at the top, the people at the bottom get used. And in Los Angeles, there's no clearer example of that in Skid Row.
A Los Angeles County woman has agreed to plead guilty to paying people on Skid Row to register to vote. Federal officials announcing the charge against Brenda Lee Brown Armstrong this week, which carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. The National News Desk Jeff Harris joining us, and according to her plea agreement, we do know Brown Armstrong allegedly worked as a petition circulator for nearly 2 decades. There is striking social media video. What else is coming to light?
So in that plea agreement, Brown Armstrong admitting to working as a paid petition circulator, allegedly targeting the homeless while gathering signatures throughout the Los Angeles area. The bombshell admission coming after federal officials got their hands on an undercover video.
The Justice Department announcing this week Brown Armstrong has been federally charged and has agreed to plead guilty to 1 felony count of paying another person to register to vote, including the homeless along LA Skid Row.
I was just walking around Skid Row last night, just cruising around, just checking everything out. So this part of the story really turns my stomach, because now we're not just talking about bad policy. Right now we're talking about desperate people being treated like political material. Federal agents have been on Skid Row after allegations involving homeless residents, voter registration forms, petition signatures, small payments. Let me be clear. This does not automatically mean fake votes changed an election, but it does show something very, very ugly. When someone living on the street can be allegedly moved by $2, perhaps a cigarette or a phone card, that's not democracy. That is desperation. being harvested.
A Marina Del Rey woman will plead guilty to paying people, including homeless people on Skid Row, to register to vote. 64-year-old Brenda Armstrong made her initial appearance in a federal court in Santa Ana yesterday. She's expected to enter the plea at a later date. Prosecutors say she tried to get homeless people to sign petitions about various ballot measures, but sometimes the signatures were disqualified because people weren't actually registered to vote.
We're going to aggressively prosecute election fraud. This is an ongoing active investigation. Ms. Brown is simply the first person that we are announcing charges for in this investigation.
Prosecutors say in some instances, Armstrong used her former address to register people who didn't have addresses. When sentenced, she could face up to 5 years in federal prison.
And the people running the system here in Los Angeles don't want to face that. Skid Row is useful to everybody. It's useful for speeches. It's useful for campaign videos. It's useful for funding requests. Useful when politicians need to look compassionate. But useful does not mean cared for. Because if these people were truly being cared for and protected, it would not be this easy to exploit. The same leaders who preside over this disaster stand in front of cameras and talk about dignity. Dignity? Where's the dignity in letting people rot on the sidewalks for years, then acting shocked when bad actors allegedly show up with cash and paperwork? This investigation matters because even the allegation tells us something is rotten. When the most broken people in the city become politically useful, the city is not just failing. No, the city is feeding on the failure. That is what makes this Skid Row story so disturbing. This is not just about elections. This is about what happens when a city allows human desperation to become a part of a political economy. Homelessness becomes funding. You see, funding becomes contracts. Contracts become power. Power becomes protection. And the people suffering on the sidewalk remain useful precisely because the crisis never gets solved. That is the part the system leaders of Los Angeles do not want to admit. A solved crisis cannot be campaigned on forever. A solved crisis cannot keep justifying emergency money forever. A solved crisis cannot keep producing press conferences, task force, nonprofits, departments, and political careers forever. So when allegations come out that vulnerable people on Skid Row may have been targeted in election-related activity, it hits differently because it fits the pattern. The vulnerable are not just neglected, they're useful. And that is why an outsider like Spencer Pratt matters in this moment, not because he's perfect, not because he has every answer, but because he disrupted the script long enough for people to start connecting stories they were never supposed to connect.
No, he's very bitter. My goal hasn't changed. I've been laser focused on stopping these commie animals, and I will stop them. If you think we uncovered a lot of fraud and evil in the campaign, just wait. We have some recordings of one of your exalted candidates doing and saying something that would make her resign in shame.
Now, this is where Spencer Pratt fits in. Not as a savior, not as a perfect candidate, not as some political genius with every answer. That's not the point. The point is, he walked into a room he was never supposed to be taken seriously in. And people, they started listening. That is a problem for the system leaders of Los Angeles. That is a problem for Los Angeles politics, because this city is used to controlled candidates, folks that are polished, managed, pre-approved, folks that are careful, folks that are connected, people who know the lines and never kick the furniture over. Pratt kicked the furniture over. He came in loud, messy, unfiltered, but he made people look. And once people started looking, the questions came fast. Why does homelessness never get solved? Where does the money go? Why does the media protect certain people? Why are records suddenly harder to get? Why do failures keep turning into new funding streams? That is why this does not end because he lost. In some ways, losing frees him. Now he has no campaign script. Now he has no consultants sanding off the edges. No pretending to be acceptable to people who are never going to accept him anyway. Now he can just talk. Now he can name names. Now he can become pressured. And that is what scares the machine the most. Not Spencer Pratt by himself. No, attention. Because attention creates questions. Questions lead to records. Records? Oh, records lead to money trails. And money trails lead to people who thought nobody would ever look. And that's the whole point. Stop looking at these like random headlines, a public records bill, unemployment fraud, a Skid Row election-related investigation, Spencer Pratt making noise in a mayoral race he was never supposed to be taken seriously in. These are not separate stories. These are symptoms. Symptoms of a system that has gotten too comfortable operating in the dark. And the reason this matters is simple. The system does not need you to agree with everything it does. It just needs you confused enough to stop looking, confused about where the money went, confused about who's responsible, confused about why homelessness never gets solved, confused about why records suddenly get harder to access, confused about why the same people keep failing upward. You see, confusion is the shield. And that's why attention is dangerous, because attention creates questions. Questions create pressure. Pressure creates records. Records create trails, and trails lead to people who thought nobody would ever look. That is what Spencer Pratt may have done, whether people want to admit it or not. He made people look. He made people ask. He made people realize Los Angeles politics is not broken by accident. It's protected by layers. Layers of confusion, money, media silence, and public exhaustion. And now that people are starting to connect the dots, the machine has a problem, because once the public starts asking the right questions, the old tricks do not work the same way. You cannot just smile at a press conference. You cannot just blame the last administration. You can't just ask for another $1 billion. You can't just tell people, trust the process. Not when the process keeps producing the same failure. So no, this story did not end when Spencer Pratt lost. That may be when the real story started. Because now the question is not whether Spencer Pratt becomes the mayor, no. The question is whether the people of Los Angeles finally stop being confused long enough to see what has been happening right in front of them. And if that happens, if the public really starts looking, if the public starts demanding records, audits, names, contracts, and accountability, then the machine has a real problem on its hands. Because the moment the public stops being confused, the game changes.